Hello and welcome back to my channel. Since it is my birthday today, or at least I hope it will be my birthday today, but I might not get organized enough to upload this on time, so that it will have been my birthday a few days ago. But since I'm turning 38, I thought it would be a good idea to have a look at my 40 before 40 list. So last year I made a list of 40 books I want to read before I turn 40. This is basically a list of books that I had been seeing around for a while, and I kept sort of going back to in my mind, and every time I saw someone else mention this book, I was like, oh yeah, I still want to read that book. So that's basically the list. There's different genres on there. There is classics on there. There is like relatively recent releases on there. So other than I want to read this book sometime, there's not really any connections between the books. But yeah, I wanted to go through the list because I've never shared the entire list before. And yeah, see what I have already read and what I still have left to read. I have them all written down in this notebook, and I wrote them down in order of publication dates, sort of, and I'll get to the sort of. It will make sense when I get through the list. So the first book I have on here is The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. And I put this on here because it is a big chunky classic, but everyone who I've seen reading it was kind of scared to go into it at first, but then they all loved it. They were all like really surprised how invested they were in the story. So yeah, that's why I put that one on the list. Number 2 is The Woman in White by Wilkie Collins. I think it was Simon Savage who made me want to read this book because he was talking about it quite a lot a few years ago, and it's one of those like sensational novels of the 19th century, and I think I'll have a lot of fun with it. Number 3 was Middlemarch, which I have already read, and I really enjoyed it. I just didn't like it as much as maybe I'd hoped, or you know, it isn't like the 5-star experience that a lot of people seem to have with this book. But I'm still very glad I've read it, and just to have it as a sort of reference point in my mind. Number 4 is Anna Karenina by Lev Tolstoj. I read quite a few of the Russian classics sort of in my early 20s, and I did quite enjoy them then, but I haven't read any for years and years now. I think Anna Karenina is such a well-known character in world literature that I really would like to read that book as well. So those were sort of the 3 big chunky classics I have on this list. So I still have 2 more to go for that one. Yeah, the next book on the list is The House of Mirth by Edith Wharton. I just would love to read something from that time period, like the early 20th century in America. Would love to read that. On number 6 I have O Pioneers by Willa, Cather, and I think that was written in a similar time as The House of Mirth, but they deal with that very different sides of the United States. The House of Mirth, I think, deals with sort of high society, rich people, and then O Pioneers were more farmers and settlers, you know, and people who were pioneering. And yeah, Willa Cather is just an author that keeps on popping up that I think I might enjoy. Then on number 7 I had Willowes by Sylvia Townsend Warner, and that is a book I read fairly recently, and that was also a book that I really enjoyed, but isn't going to be one of my favorites, but I'm still glad I read it. I could cross it off this list. Number 8 is The Street by Anne Petry, which I have also already read this year. Again, really glad I read this book. I could really see why this is considered a modern classic. I think it deals with important topics, and even though it was written, I think, in the 1940s, it has this real timeless quality to it, which in my opinion is something that a modern classic should have. It should speak to readers throughout the years. So yeah, The Street by Anne Petry, I read that. On number 9, We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson. I have read some of her short stories, which I really enjoyed, but I've never read any of her full-length novels. I love her sort of slight creepiness in her writing, and this one has like a spooky house, so I might try and read this fairly soon to sort of read it in spooky season. Yeah, I definitely get like autumnal winter vibes from this book, and I think I'll really enjoy it. And then I have number 10, which is Anything by James Baldwin. Like I said, I had it in rough chronological order, but obviously anything by James Baldwin, that is a span of years, so I couldn't put it exactly in one point. I have read Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin before, which I really enjoyed, but I feel like that book is a little bit different from his other books because it was set in Italy, Italy or France, now I'm not sure anymore, and all of his other books are very much set in the States, and they are also very much dealing with racism and the black experience. So yeah, I'm not sure what I'll pick up for this. He has written both fiction and non-fiction. So yeah, anything by James Baldwin I want to read before I turn 40. Number 11 is Picnic at Hanging Rock by Joan Lindsay. This is an Australian modern classic. I really cannot remember anymore what this story was about, but I think it had sort of slightly gothic, set in summer in Australia kind of vibes. I don't know, I put it on my list and I still want to read it. I think I'll like it. Number 12 is I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings by Maya Angelou. She is a poet who wrote down her memoirs, and I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings is the first installment of her memoirs about her childhood. And from what I've heard, she writes really beautifully. It's a very difficult story, but an important one, and obviously Maya Angelou is very highly regarded as an author. So yeah, I'd love to try her work. Number 13 is The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula K. Le Guin. I have never read anything by her, and from what I've sort of researched, that book is a good place to start. I lately have been sort of getting into sci-fi a bit more. I've been really interested in sort of what it can do with like social commentary. I like how science fiction gives an opportunity to bend the rules a little bit, and that gives like space to explore different societal structures and things like that. So that's the kind of sci-fi I'm looking for, and I believe that is also what she's writing. Yeah. Number 14 is Maurice by E.M. Forster. I have read a couple of E.M. Forster's books. I read Where Angels Feed Thread, and I read A Room with a View, and I enjoyed both of them. I particularly wanted to read Maurice because it's a queer classic. So yeah, that's why I put it on this list. Number 15 is Pilgrim at Tinker Creek by Annie Dillard. I put this on here because I feel like it's a classic in nature writing, and I always love reading about nature and reading nature writing. In that same vein, I had also put The Living Mountain by Nan Shepherd on this list, which I read last year, I think last year, for surely September, or maybe for non-fiction November, and I really enjoyed that, so I'm glad I have crossed that one off my list. Number 17, I have put Housekeeping by Marilynne Robinson. Again, this is an author that I wouldn't really know what her books are about, but for some reason I have the idea that I would like their writing. Just the way some people have talked about her books seems like I might enjoy them. I feel like they're quite slow-paced, very character-driven, which are both things that I really like. So I've got Housekeeping by Marilynne Robinson. Then on number 18 I have Anything by Stephen King. I'm kind of leaning towards maybe reading some of his short stories. Stephen King is obviously well known for his horror writing and his mystery writing, which are both genres I'm not particularly interested in, especially not horror because I'm quite a scaredy cat. So I'm not really looking to read, some of his more well-known books that are, more on the horror side. So maybe I'll read some of his short stories because I think I'll enjoy them. Number 19, I have The Women of Brewster Place by Gloria Naylor. This appealed to me because it is interlinked short stories, which I really love, and they are all like set around these certain locations and sort of different people who live in the street. So just sort of that setup is something that really appeals to me, and obviously it's a modern classic. It's not been so popular for nothing. Then on number 20 I have The Magnificent Spinster by May Sarton. I heard about this book when Russell over at Ink and Paper blog spoke about this, I don't know, maybe 7 or 8 years ago, quite a long time ago, but it's sort of stuck in my mind ever since then, because it has an sort of older female main character who is single, or she's called a spinster, and Russell has said that she is one of her favorite main characters, and that just really spoke to me. Okay, we're halfway through the list. On number 21 I've got Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry. This is a western which I don't think I've read. No, that's not true. I read True Grit earlier this year. But this is one of those books that everyone who has read it, like no one who's read it has ever read a western before, but everyone has really seemed to love this book. It's like a big chunky book as well, and I think it's a great book to just sort of get stuck into. Then on number 22 I've got something very different, and that is Kitchen by Banana Yoshimoto, which I have read either earlier this year or last year. this is a modern classic of Japanese literature, and I really enjoyed that book as well. And then on number 23 I've got Remains of the Day by Kazuo Ishiguro. I read a couple of his books before. I read Never Let Me Go, and then last year, or was it the year before, I read Clara and the Sun. And again, this is a book that a lot of people sort of read going in with sort of quite low expectations, and they were really surprised by how much they liked this book, even if it wasn't necessarily something they would have picked up. So yeah, very curious where I stand on this book. Number 24 is Alias Grace by Margaret Atwood. Again, an author I've read multiple books of before. This is an historical fiction book, which is a genre I really like, so I'd love to see what she does with that genre. Number 25 is Into Thin Air by Jon Krakauer. I read Into the Wild by this author before, and I think he is an excellent non-fiction author, especially sort of travel, nature, adventure kind of non-fiction. This is a book on mountaineering, which is not necessarily a book or a topic that I am interested in, but I think Jon Krakauer will make it interesting, and yeah, that's why it's on this list. On number 26 I have The Namesake by Jhumpa Lahiri. And I've read this book early this year. I read this for Kim over at Middle of the Book Marches book club, which she ran early this year. And I think, sort of like everyone, there were parts that I enjoyed, but I wasn't too blown away by it. I read her short stories, or read some of her short story collections earlier, and I think I like her short fiction more than I like her full-length novel. But yeah, it was sort of the list, so I'm happy with that. Number 27 is Small Island by Andrea Levy. This is more of a backlist title, and it deals with the Windrush generation of the UK, people who came over from the Caribbean, and it's another book that I've only heard really good things about. Then on number 28 I have The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander, which I have read. This is a non-fiction book all about the prison system in the US. It was written, I think, 20 years ago, and we could probably consider it a classic in non-fiction by now. Yeah, I loved it. I think everyone should read that book, because I learned a lot from it. On number 29 I have The Sound of a Wild Snail Eating by Elizabeth Tover Bailey. This is a memoir of someone who is bedridden because of a chronic illness, and her friend gives her a snail to look after, and yeah, that's basically just what this book is about. She observes this snail, and she has a lot of time to do this because she's bedridden. I think this is also a classic, or at least an important book in non-fiction about disability. On number 30 I have Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers. This was a book I was kind of hesitant to read, and that was just because the kind of readers who read this book mostly read other books that I wasn't interested in. So sort of more YA fantasy kind of side of BookTube. But I kept on seeing this one sort of trickling into the literary fiction side of BookTube, which I find myself a part of. and I'm so glad I did, and I read it early this year. It was the first book I read this year, and I absolutely loved it. So I'm glad I picked up that book. On number 31 I have The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk, and this is the only book I'm a little bit doubtful whether I still want to read it. It deals with it's a non-fiction book that deals with the topic of the body remembering trauma and trauma manifesting in the body in a very physical way. And that is a topic that I'm still very interested in. It's just that I've read some negative things about the author and the book, mainly that it is being very white male centered. So if anyone has a recommendation of a book that deals with the same topic by a different author, then I would definitely take that recommendation. Then on number 32 I've got The Sixth Extinction, and I didn't write down the author's name. I think she's Elizabeth Colbert, maybe. This is a classic in climate change fiction writing, I think, so I'd love to read that one. Number 33 is The Hidden Life of Trees by Peter Wolleben, which is, I think, another classic in nature writing. This one is all about trees, and I've just yet to read a book about trees, even though I love trees. So that's The Hidden Life of Trees on number 33. On number 34 I've got The Break by Karenina Vermette. She is an indigenous author, and every time I look for indigenous books to read, this is the book that keeps on popping up. A few people whose reading taste I really trust have read this book. I know Mercedes has read this book and loved this. So yeah, that's why I put it on this list as well. On number 35 I have I Contain Multitudes by Ed Young. I believe this book is all about like all the bacteria you have in your body, but now I'm not entirely sure anymore. But I do know that people who have read this book have said that he makes this topic that is maybe not that interesting. He makes that very interesting, and he writes very engagingly. So that's why I put this on this list, and I would love to read more sort of sciencey non-fiction. On number 36 I have Upstream by Mary Oliver. I haven't read anything by Mary Oliver. She is probably most famous as a poet, and Upstream is her essays collections, or is an essay collection. I've read some snippets of her poetry, and she writes mainly about nature, and I love the snippets that I've seen, so I'd love to read something more by her. On number 37 I have Cantolas by Carolina de Robertis. This was one of those books that I'd seen a few people talk about, but it didn't get a lot of buzz. But everyone who did read it really loved it. And I read this earlier this year, and I really love this as well. And yeah, I think it deserves more readers, so do pick it up if you get a chance. Then on number 38 I have Know My Name by Chanel Miller, which is probably one of the biggest memoirs in the last decade or so. And everyone who's read it has been saying it's an important book to read just because of the topic. Just her story is an interesting story that she tells, and that more people should read. But then also that her writing was really beautiful. And I'm actually reading this book right now, and so far I couldn't agree more. This book is absolutely written very beautifully, and it's a must read. On Then on number 39 I have Maybe You Should Talk to Someone by Laurie Gottlieb. This is a non-fiction book where a psychologist or a psychiatrist talks about her own experience going into therapy. And I think it'll be very interesting to read a book about therapy from someone who has been on it from both sides. And then the last book, number 40, finally, we've got Disability, Visibility. This is an essay collection edited by Alice Wong, and this is all different essays written by people with all different kinds of disability, sensory disabilities, chronic illnesses, bodily differences, neurodiverse authors, and I think it'll be a great sort of starting off point to read more about disability and activism. Yeah, so that was the entire list. So I read 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 books of the list already, which means I still have 31 books to go, and I will have 2 years to do that before I turn 40. I think it's very manageable. I just have to set my mind a bit to it. I have a couple of books already on my physical TBR. I have The Women of Forster Place. I've got The House of Mirth. I have Small Island and Disability, Visibility already on my TBR. So those will definitely get read within the next 2 years. But yeah, hopefully all of them. I'm still pretty excited to read all of these. So yeah, I'd love to know if you have ever done something similar. I've seen quite a few people doing a 30 before 30 list. Also, if you've read any of these books, I would really like to hear your thoughts. And lastly, if anyone is interested in doing any buddy reads of these books with me, please let me know, because I think it'll be a good way to get me motivated to read as much of these books if I've got people to read them with. Yeah, that's it for today. I will see you in the next video. Bye bye.